The first time I saw Madame Jin bleed, her blood was on my hands. Not in some dramatic movie way. Not in slow motion. Not with music swelling in the background. It was under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room at Detroit Mercy, with monitors screaming and doctors shouting over each other while I pressed both palms against the wound in her side and prayed she did not die before sunrise. I did not know who she was then. To me, she was just another elderly woman wheeled in after a late-night shooting, dressed in silk too expensive for my salary to understand. Her silver hair soaked with rain and blood, her sharp black eyes fixed on mine like she was memorizing my face. "Stay with me," I whispered. "You hear me? Stay with me." Her fingers wrapped around my wrist with surprising strength, and in a voice so thin I almost missed it, she said, "If I live, your life will change." I thought she was delirious. People say strange things when they are dying. They call for mothers who have been gone 20 years. They beg God for one more chance. They confess sins nobody asked to hear. So I smiled behind my mask and kept working. "Save your strength," I told her. But 3 weeks later, when a black car longer than my apartment pulled up outside my building and 5 silent men stepped out wearing tailored suits, I realized that old woman had not been rambling. She had been warning me. And by the time I stood in Madame Jin's mansion, staring at 5 sons who looked at me like I was a debt their mother intended to collect, I understood one terrifying truth. Saving her life had been the most dangerous thing I had ever done. Before that night, my life had been painfully ordinary. I was 32 years old, a Nigerian immigrant who had spent most of her 20s surviving. Not thriving, just surviving. I worked 12-hour shifts as a nurse in Detroit. I lived in a small second-floor apartment that always smelled faintly of shea butter and garlic because my downstairs neighbor cooked at midnight. I sent money home to my mother in Lagos every month, even when I barely had enough left for myself. My world was simple. Wake up. Work. Come home. Microwave leftovers. Call my mother. Sleep. Repeat. My mother hated that I lived alone. "Keisha," she would say through the phone, "you take care of everybody except yourself." I would laugh. "Mama? Yeah, I'm fine." "You always say fine. Fine can still be lonely." And sometimes she was right. There were nights after a long shift when I sat by my window with tea gone cold in my hands, watching snow fall over a city that still did not feel like mine, and wondered if this was all my life would ever be. Not unhappy, just unfinished. At the hospital, people knew me as the calm one, the nurse who did not panic, the one who could speak softly enough to make frightened patients breathe again, the one who stayed 10 minutes after her shift because an old man needed someone to hold his hand. I liked that version of myself, because growing up, my father used to say, "Some people carry storms, some people carry shelter. Decide which one you will be." I chose shelter. I never imagined that choice would pull me into a storm bigger than anything I had ever known. The night Madame Jin came in was near the end of a brutal shift. My feet hurt. My back ached. I had not eaten since noon. Then the ambulance doors burst open. "Female, late 60s, a paramedic shouted. "Gunshot wound, significant blood loss." I moved on instinct. Gloves, pressure, vitals, orders. She should have been terrified. Most people were. But while doctors cut away her clothes and nurses rushed around her bed, Madame Jin looked calm. Too calm, as if pain was something she had met before. And when our eyes met, I felt something cold slide down my spine. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Like she already knew I mattered. After surgery, the doctor said she should have died. The bullet had missed an artery by less than an inch. The surgeon called it luck. Madame Jin called it fate. I did not hear that part until later, because for several days after, strange things started happening. At first it was small. A bouquet of white orchids appeared at the nurse's station with no card. Then expensive chocolates. Then an envelope with $5,000 in cash tucked inside my locker. I stared at the money like it might explode. I took it straight to my supervisor. "I can't accept this." My supervisor raised her eyebrows. "From who?" "There's no name." But deep down, I already knew. That evening when I left work, a man in a charcoal suit stood by the entrance. He bowed slightly, not enough to look submissive, just enough to feel deliberate. Miss Keisha? I froze. Yes? Madam Jin would like to thank you personally. I don't accept gifts. His expression never changed. It is not a gift, it is respect. I should have walked away. I wanted to. But something about the way he said it made refusal feel dangerous. I have another shift tomorrow. He nodded once. The car will return Sunday. Then he walked away like the conversation had never been optional. That entire weekend, I told myself I would not go. I cleaned my apartment. I called my mother. I made jollof rice. I tried to pretend my heart was not beating harder every time headlights passed my window. Sunday at 6, the car came, and I got in. The mansion stood behind iron gates in Bloomfield Hills, hidden by trees so tall they seemed planted to keep secrets. Inside, everything was quiet. Not peaceful, controlled, the kind of silence money can buy. They led me into a dining room where Madame Jin sat at the head of a long table, dressed in cream silk like she had never nearly died. 5 men stood behind her, her sons, each one different, each one dangerous in his own way. The eldest, Jun Seo, had eyes like polished stone. The second, Tae, looked charming enough to make you forget he could hurt you. The fourth, Min, seemed restless, like violence lived close to his skin. The youngest, Sue, watched everything without speaking. And then there was Dae, the third son. He stood slightly apart from the others in a black shirt with his hands behind his back. His face was beautiful in a way that felt severe. Cold, unreadable. He looked at me once, then away, like I was already a ghost. Madam Jin smiled at me. You saved my life. I was doing my job. No, she said softly. You gave me something no one else could. I tried to smile politely. You don't owe me anything. The room went still. Then Madame Jin said the words that changed everything. In my family, life debts are sacred. They must be repaid. Something inside me tightened. What does that mean? She looked toward her sons. It means you will become family. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because it sounded absurd. Until no one else did. You cannot be serious. I am. My throat went dry. You're saying you will marry one of my sons. I stared at her, waiting for someone to admit this was insanity. No one did. No, I whispered. Madam Jin folded her hands. You may choose which one. I don't want any of them. For the first time, Dae looked directly at me. His eyes were empty in a way that frightened me more than anger would have. Madam Jin's voice stayed gentle. You saved my life. Refusing dishonors mine. Mi pulstona. This is not repayment. This is ownership. Something flickered in Dae's face at that word. Just for a second. Ownership. Like he understood it too well. I should have said no again. I should have walked out. But fear does strange things. Fear can make impossible choices feel smaller than they are. And when I looked at the 5 men, only one of them seemed like he might leave me alone. So I pointed to Dae, the quiet one. Madam Jin smiled. Da. Dae's jaw tightened. But he said nothing. And that silence became my answer. The wedding happened 5 days later. No church. No family. No joy. Just a private ceremony in Madam Jin's home with witnesses who looked like they had buried bodies before breakfast. I wore a white dress chosen by someone else. Dae wore black. He never smiled. Never touched me except when the vows required his hand to brush mine. Even then his fingers were cold. That first night, he showed me to a bedroom larger than my apartment. Then he stopped at the door. You can lock it if you want. I stared at him. You're not coming in? His face never changed. No. Why? A long silence. Then he said, because unlike the rest of this house, some things should still be your choice. And he walked away. That was the first crack. Small, almost invisible, but enough for me to see that beneath all that ice was something buried. For weeks, we lived like strangers sharing a prison. By day, I learned the rhythms of the house. Who spoke? Who obeyed? Who feared whom? Madam Jin ruled everything. Junseo handled business. Tae handled appearances. Min handled violence. Su handled information. And Dae disappeared. Sometimes I would not see him for 2 days. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night and find him standing by the window in the dark, like sleep had abandoned him years ago. You should rest, I told him once. He gave a hollow laugh. I forgot how. Slowly, I stopped being afraid of him, because fear cannot survive too long beside sorrow. One night I found him in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at a glass of whiskey he had not touched. You never drink it, I said. He looked at me. How do you know? Because every morning the bottle is full again. For the first time, something almost like amusement touched his mouth. You notice too much. I'm a nurse, it's my job. His gaze dropped. My father drank before he beat us, he said quietly. I can't stand the smell. I froze. That was the first real thing he ever gave me. And once a wounded person starts telling the truth, the rest tends to follow. His father had built the empire before Madame Jin took control. Cruel, paranoid, violent. Dae had been 11 when he tried to protect his youngest brother. His father nearly killed him for it. After that, Dae learned the safest way to survive was to feel nothing, or at least to look like he felt nothing. That's why they call you the ghost, I said softly. He nodded. I stepped closer. You're not empty, Dae. His voice cracked in a way that broke my heart. You don't know what's left. I did not mean to touch him, but my hand found his. And for 1 second, he held on like a drowning man. The Chen organization started their war 2 months later. I did not understand the politics, only the tension. More guards, more guns, more whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Then one afternoon, on my way back from the clinic, a van pulled beside me. A hand covered my mouth. A needle burnt my neck. And everything went black. When I woke up, I was tied to a chair in a cold warehouse. My wrists hurt. My mouth tasted like metal. A man sat across from me smiling. Mrs. Jin? I'm not. You are now. He leaned forward. Dae Jin's weakness. I laughed despite the fear. You clearly don't know your enemy. Oh, he said. We do. He showed me a phone screen. Security footage. Dae kissing me in the kitchen when he thought no one could see. Softly. Like I was something fragile. Like I mattered. My chest tightened. Because I had not realized until that moment that somewhere between forced vows and midnight confessions, I had fallen in love with my husband. And the men who took me already knew it. Hours later, gunfire exploded outside. Shouting, glass shattering, footsteps. Then the warehouse door burst open. Dae stood there with blood on his shirt and murder in his eyes. Not cold, not empty, not hollow, just fury. Pure and terrifying. He crossed the room in seconds, dropped to his knees, and cut the ropes from my wrists with shaking hands. Did they hurt you? I could barely breathe. You came, his forehead pressed against mine. Of course I came. Then he whispered words I had never expected to hear. I would burn this city down for you. After that, everything changed. He stopped sleeping in the hallway. Stopped pretending distance could protect either of us. Stopped acting like love was something weaker men needed. And for the first time in years, Dae began to feel alive. But peace in that family never lasted long. Because love always makes enemies bolder. 3 weeks later, the Chens struck again. Harder, smarter. They didn't come for me. They came for Dae. By the time the alarm sounded, he was gone. Madame Jin stood in the shattered living room, calmer than anyone else. They took the wrong son, Min growled. No, I said. They took the one they fear. 4 brothers turned toward me. Junseo studied my face. You want to help? I'm going. Tae shook his head. This isn't your world. I looked him straight in the eye. It became my world the day your mother chose me. Silence. Then Sue, the quiet youngest, spoke for the first time. She stays. And just like that, the brothers stopped seeing me as an outsider. We found Dae in an abandoned shipping yard at the river, beaten and chained but still defiant. The rescue was chaos. Gunshots, sirens, Men screaming. I stayed low, did what I knew. While his brothers fought, I ran to Day. He was barely conscious. "Hey," I whispered, cutting the chain from his wrists. "Open your eyes." His lashes fluttered. When he saw me, he actually smiled. "You never listen." I laughed through tears. "No, I really don't." Then I helped carry him home. The truth of everything spread quietly after that. Not to the newspapers, not to the police, but inside the family, something had shifted. Madame Jin no longer looked at me like a debt. She looked at me like a choice that had surprised even her. One evening she found me in the garden. "You changed him," she said. I shook my head. "No, he was always there." She studied me for a long moment. Then she said something I never expected. "You changed all of us. Because love has a way of exposing the places fear once lived." Min smiled more. Tai stopped pretending everything was a joke. Sue started speaking. Even Junseo began asking my opinion. And Day started sleeping through the night. Sometimes I would wake and find his hand reaching for mine in his sleep, as if some part of him still needed to make sure I was real. And every time, I held on. A year later, I stood in the same hospital where I had first met Madame Jin. Only this time, I was not wearing scrubs. I was visiting with Day, who waited beside me while I checked on an elderly patient I used to care for. As we walked back to the car, he slipped his fingers through mine. A simple thing, but with Day, simple things meant everything. "You miss nursing?" he asked. "Sometimes. You can go back." I looked at him. "Really?" He shrugged. "You saved lives before me. You should not stop because of me." That was the thing about loving someone who had once lived in darkness. When they finally love you back, they do it with every broken piece they have. I smiled. "You know, for a man forced into marriage, you turned out surprisingly romantic." He looked at me with that rare, soft expression only I ever saw. "For a woman kidnapped into a crime family, you turned out surprisingly stubborn." I laughed. "That's what you love." "Yes," he said. "It is." And for the first time in my life, home did not feel like a place I had left behind. It felt like the hand holding mine. Sometimes people ask whether I regret saving Madame Jin. Whether, knowing everything that followed, I would still press my hands against that wound and choose to save a stranger. And the honest answer is this: some choices ruin the life you planned. But sometimes, they lead you to the life you were meant to find. I thought I was rescuing an old woman that night in Detroit. I never imagined that somewhere in the middle of all that blood and fear and impossible love, I was also rescuing myself. So let me ask you something. Have you ever made one small decision that changed everything after it? Because sometimes the moment that feels like the beginning of your worst mistake can become the beginning of the family your heart had been searching for all along.